Felix the Cat is a funny animal cartoon character created in the silent film era. The anthropomorphic black cat with his black body, white eyes, and giant grin, coupled with the surrealism of the situations in which his cartoons place him, combine to make Felix one of the most recognized cartoon characters in film history. Felix was the first character from animation to attain a level of popularity sufficient to draw movie audiences. Felix's origins remain disputed. Australian cartoonist film entrepreneur Pat Sullivan, owner of the Felix character, claimed during his lifetime to be its creator. American animator Otto Messmer, Sullivan's lead animator, has been credited as such. What is certain is that Felix emerged from Sullivan's studio, and cartoons featuring the character enjoyed success and popularity in the 1920s popular culture. Aside from the animated shorts, Felix starred in a comic strip beginning in 1923, and his image soon adorned merchandise such as ceramics, toys and postcards. Several manufacturers made stuffed Felix toys. Jazz bands such as Paul Whiteman's played songs about him. By the late 1920s, with the arrival of sound cartoons, Felix's success was fading. The new Disney shorts of Mickey Mouse made the silent offerings of Sullivan and Messmer, who were then unwilling to move to sound production, seem outdated. In 1929, Sullivan decided to make the transition and began distributing Felix sound cartoons through Copley Pictures. The sound Felix shorts proved to be a failure and the operation ended in 1932. Felix saw a brief 3-cartoon resurrection in 1936 by the Van Buren Studios. Felix cartoons began airing on American TV in 1953. Joe Orlo introduced a redesigned, long-legged Felix, added new characters, and gave Felix a magic bag of tricks that could assume an infinite variety of shapes at Felix's behest. The cat has since starred in other television programs and in 2 feature films. As of the 2010s, Felix is featured on a variety of merchandise from clothing to toys. Orlo's son, Don Orlo, later assumed creative control of Felix. In 2002, TV Guide ranked Felix the Cat number 28 on its 50 greatest cartoon characters of all time list. In 2014, the rights to the character were acquired by DreamWorks Animation. Creation. On November 9, 1919, Master Tom, a prototype of Felix, debuted in a Paramount Pictures short entitled Feline Follies. Produced by the New York City-based animation studio owned by Pat Sullivan, the cartoon was directed by cartoonist and animator Otto Messmer. It was a success, and the Sullivan studio quickly set to work on producing another film featuring Master Tom, the Felix the Cat prototype in the musical Muse. It too proved to be successful with audiences. Otto Messmer claimed that John King of Paramount magazine suggested the name Felix, after the Latin words Felis and Felix. The name was first used for the 3rd film starring the character, The Adventures of Felix. Pat Sullivan claimed he named Felix after Australia Felix from Australian history and literature. In 1924, animator Bill Nolan redesigned the character, making him both rounder and cuter. Felix's new looks, coupled with Messmer's character animation, brought Felix to fame. The question of who created Felix remains a matter of dispute. Sullivan stated in numerous newspaper interviews that he created Felix and did the key drawings for the character. On a visit to Australia in 1925, Sullivan told the Argus newspaper that the idea was given to me by the side of a cat which my wife brought to the studio one day. On other occasions, he claimed that Felix had been inspired by Rudyard Kipling's The Cat That Walked by Himself, or by his wife's love for strays. Members of the Australian Cartoonist Association have claimed that lettering used in Feline Follies matches Sullivan's handwriting and that Sullivan lettered within his drawings. Sullivan's supporters also say the case is supported by his March 18, 1917 release of a cartoon short entitled The Tale of Thomas Cat, more than 2 years prior to Feline Follies. Both an Australian ABC TV documentary screened in 2004 and the curators of an exhibition at the State Library of New South Wales, in 2005, suggested that Thomas Cat was a prototype or precursor of Felix. However, few details of Thomas have survived. His fur color has not been definitively established, and the surviving copyright synopsis for the short suggests significant differences between Thomas and the later Felix. For example, whereas the later Felix magically transforms his tail into tools and other objects, Thomas is a non-anthropomorphized cat who loses his tail in a fight with a rooster, never to recover it. Sullivan was the studio proprietor and as is the case with almost all film entrepreneur use he owned the copyright to any creative work by his employees. In common with many animators at the time, Messmer was not credited. After Sullivan's death in 1933, his estate in Australia took ownership of the character. It was not until after Sullivan's death that Sullivan staffers such as Hal Walker, Al Euxter, Jerry Jerome, Rudy Zamora, George Canata, and Sullivan's own lawyer, Harry Kopp, credited Messmer with Felix's creation. They claimed that Felix was based on an animated Charlie Chaplin that Messmer had animated for Sullivan's studio earlier on. The down-and-out personality and movements of the cat in Feline Follies reflect key attributes of Chaplin's, and, although blockier than the later Felix, the familiar black body is already there. Messmer himself recalled his version of the cat's creation in an interview with animation historian John Canemaker. Sullivan's studio was very busy, and Paramount, they were falling behind their schedule and they needed one extra to fill in. And Sullivan, being very busy, said, "If you want to do it on the side, you can do any little thing to satisfy them. So I figured a cat would be about the simplest. Make him all black, you wouldn't need to worry about outlines. As one gag after the other, Cute." And they all got laughs. So Paramount liked it, so they ordered a series. Animation historians back Messmer's claims. Among them are Michael Barrier, Jerry Beck, Colin and Timothy Cowles, Donald Crafton, David Eckstein, Milt Gray, Mark Korzela, Leonard Moulton, and Charles Solomon. No animation historians outside of Australia have argued on behalf of Sullivan. Sullivan marketed the cat relentlessly, while Messmer continued to produce a prodigious volume of Felix cartoons. Messmer did the animation directly on white paper with inkers tracing the drawings directly. The animators drew backgrounds onto pieces of celluloid, which were then laid atop the drawings to be photographed. Any perspective work had to be animated by hand, as the studio cameras were unable to perform pans or trucks. Pat Sullivan began a comic strip in 1923, distributed by King Features Syndicate. Messmer took over drawing duties of the strip. Popularity and distribution. Paramount Pictures distributed the earliest films from 1919 to 1921. Margaret J. Winkler distributed the shorts from 1922 to 1925, the year when Educational Pictures took over the distribution of the shorts. Sullivan promised them one new Felix short every 2 weeks. The combination of solid animation, skillful promotion, and widespread distribution brought Felix's popularity to new heights. References to alcoholism and prohibition were also commonplace in many of the Felix shorts, particularly Felix Finds Out, Wise and Otherwise, Felix Woos Whoopee to name a few. In Felix Dopes It Out, Felix tries to help his hobo friend who is plagued with a red nose. By the end of the short, the cat finds the cure for the condition, keep drinking, and it'll turn blue. In addition, Felix was one of the first images ever broadcast by television when RCHO's A Papier Mare car copyright Felix doll for a 1928 experiment via New York in Van Cortlandt Park. The doll was chosen for its tonal contrast and its ability to withstand the intense lights needed. It was placed on a rotating phonograph turntable and photographed for approximately 2 hours each day. After a one-time payoff to Sullivan, the doll remained on the turntable for nearly a decade as RCA fine-tuned the picture's definition. Felix's great success also spawned a host of imitators. The appearances and personalities of other 1920s feline stars such as Julius of Walt Disney's Alice comedies, Waffles of Paul Terry's Aesop's film Fables, and especially Bill Nolan's 1925 adaptation of Crazy Cat all seem to have been directly patterned after Felix. Felix's cartoons were also popular among critics. They have been cited as imaginative examples of surrealism in filmmaking. Felix has been said to represent a child's sense of wonder, creating the fantastic when it is not there, and taking it in stride when it is. His famous posture hands behind his back, head down, deep in thought became a trademark that has been analyzed by critics around the world. Felix's expressive tail, which could be a shovel one moment, an exclamation mark or pencil the next, serves to emphasize that anything can happen in his world. Aldous Huxley wrote that the Felix shorts proved that, what the cinema can do better than literature or the spoken drama is to be fantastic. By 1923, the character was at the peak of his film career. Felix in Hollywood, a short released during this year, plays upon Felix's popularity, as he becomes acquainted with such fellow celebrities as Douglas Fairbanks, Cecil B. DeMille, Charlie Chaplin, Ben Turpin, and even censor Will H. Hayes. His image could be seen on clocks, Christmas ornaments, and as the first giant balloon ever made for Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Felix also became the subject of several popular songs of the day, such as Felix Kept Walking by Paul Whiteman. Sullivan made an estimated $100,000 a year from toy licensing alone. With the character's success also emerged a handful of new co-stars. These included Felix's master Willie Jones, a mouse named Skidoo, Felix's nephews Inky, Dinky, and Winky, and his girlfriend Kitty. Felix the Cat sheet music, with music by Pete Wendling and Max Cortlander, featuring lyrics by Alfred Bryan, was published in 1928 by Sam Fox Publishing Company. The cover art of Felix playing a banjo was done by Otto Messmer. Most of the early Felix cartoons mirrored American attitudes of the Roaring Twenties. Ethnic stereotypes appeared in such shorts as Felix Goes Hungry. Recent events such as the Russian Civil War were depicted in shorts like Felix All Puzzled. Flappers were caricatured in Felix Strikes It Rich. He also became involved in union organizing with Felix Revolts. In some shorts, Felix even performed a rendition of the Charleston. In 1928, Educational ceased releasing the Felix cartoons and several were reissued by First National Pictures. Copley Pictures distributed them from 1929 to 1930. He saw a brief three-cartoon resurrection in 1936 by the Van Buren Studios. Sullivan did most of the marketing for the character in the 1920s. In these Van Buren Studios shorts, Felix spoke and sang in a high-pitched childlike voice provided by Walter Tetley, a popular radio actor in the 1930s and 1940s, Julius on the Phil Harris Alice Faye Show, and Leroy on The Great Gildersleeve, however best known later in the 1960s as the voice of Sherman on the Bullwinkle Show's Mr. Peabody segments. Felix as mascot and pop culture icon. Given the character's unprecedented popularity and the fact that his name was partially derived from the Latin word for lucky, some rather notable individuals and organizations adopted Felix as a mascot. The first of these was a Los Angeles Chevrolet dealer and friend of Pat Sullivan named Winslow B. Felix, who first opened his showroom in 1921. The three-sided neon sign of Felix Chevrolet, with its giant, smiling images of the character, is today one of LA's best-known landmarks, standing watch over both Figueroa Street and the Harbor Freeway. Others who adopted Felix included the 1922 New York Yankees and aviator Charles Lindbergh, who took a Felix doll with him on his historic flight across the Atlantic Ocean. This popularity persisted. In the late 1920s, the U.S. Navy's Bombing Squadron 2 adopted a unit insignia consisting of Felix happily carrying a bomb with a burning fuse. They retained the insignia through the 1930s when they became a fighter squadron under the designations VF-6B and, later, VF-3, whose members Edward O'Hare and John Thatch became famous naval aviators in World War II. After the World War, a U.S. Navy fighter squadron currently designated VFA-31 replaced its winged meat cleaver logo with the same insignia, after the original Felix squadron had been disbanded. The carrier-based night fighter squadron, nicknamed the Tomcatters, remained active under various designations continuing through the present day, and Felix still appears on both the squadron's cloth jacket patches and aircraft, carrying his bomb with its fuse burning. Felix is also the oldest high school mascot in the state of Indiana, chosen in 1926 after a Logansport High School player brought his plush Felix to a basketball game. When the team came from behind and won that night, Felix became the mascot of all the Logansport High School sports teams. Nearly a century after his first debut on screen in 1919, he still makes occasional appearances in pop culture. The pop-punk band The Queers also use Felix as a mascot, often drawn to reflect punk sensibilities and attributes such as scowling, smoking, or playing the guitar. Felix adorns the covers of both the Surf Goddess EP and the Move Back Home album. Felix also appears in the music video for the single Don't Back Down. Besides appearing on the covers and liner notes of various albums, the iconic cat also appears in merchandise such as t-shirts and buttons. Felix has cameos in the 1988 film Who Framed Roger Rabbit and at the 2015 Treefort Music Fest. From silent to sound. With the advent of the jazz singer in 1927, Educational Pictures, who distributed the Felix shorts at the time, urged Pat Sullivan to make the leap to talkie cartoons, but Sullivan refused. Further disputes led to a break between Educational and Sullivan. Only when Walt Disney's Steamboat Willie made cinematic history as the first talking cartoon with a synchronized soundtrack did Sullivan see the possibilities of sound. He managed to secure a contract with First National Pictures in 1928. However, for reasons unknown, this did not last. So Sullivan sought out Jacques Kopstein and Copley Pictures to distribute his new Sound Felix cartoons. On October 16, 1929, an advertisement appeared in Film Daily with Felix announcing, "Jolson-like, you ain't heard nothing yet." Unfortunately, Felix's transition to sound was not a smooth one. Sullivan did not carefully prepare for Felix's transition to sound, and added sound effects into the sound cartoons as a post-animation process. The results were disastrous. More than ever, it seemed as though Disney's mouse was drawing audiences away from Sullivan's silent star. Not even entries such as the offbeat Felix Woos Whoopee, or the silly symphony-esque April Maze could regain the franchise's audience. Kopstein finally cancelled Sullivan's contract. Subsequently, he announced plans to start a new studio in California, but such ideas never materialized. Things went from bad to worse when Sullivan's wife, Marjorie, died in March 1932. After this, Sullivan completely fell apart. He slumped into an alcoholic depression, his health rapidly declined, and his memory began to fade. He could not even cash checks to Mesmer because his signature was reduced to a mere scribble. He died in 1933. Mesmer recalled, "He left everything a mess, no books, no nothing." So when he died the place had to close down, at the height of popularity, when everybody, RKO and all of them, for years they tried to get hold of Felix. "I didn't have that permission, to continue the character cause I didn't have legal ownership of it." In 1935, Amédée J. Van Buren of the Van Buren Studios called Mesmer and asked him if he could return Felix to the screen. Van Buren even stated that Mesmer would be provided with a full staff and all of the necessary utilities. However, Mesmer declined his offer and instead recommended Burt Gillett, a former Sullivan staffer who was now heading the Van Buren staff. So, in 1936, Van Buren obtained approval from Sullivan's brother to license Felix to his studio with the intention of producing new shorts both in color and with sound. With Gillett at the helm, now with a heavy Disney influence, he did away with Felix's established personality and made him just another funny animal character of the type popular in the day. The new shorts were unsuccessful, and after only 3 outings Van Buren discontinued the series. Revival. In 1953, Official Films purchased the Sullivan-Mesmer shorts, added soundtracks to them, and distributed to the home movie and television markets. Mesmer himself pursued the Sunday Felix comic strips until their discontinuance in 1943, when he began 11 years of writing and drawing Felix comic books for Dell Comics that were released every other month. In 1954, Mesmer retired from the Felix daily newspaper strips, and his assistant Joe Orillo took over. Orillo struck a deal with Felix's new owner, Pat Sullivan's nephew, to begin a new series of Felix cartoons on television. Aurelio went on to star Felix in 260 television cartoons distributed by Translux beginning in 1958. Like the Van Buren studio before, Aurelio gave Felix a more domesticated and pedestrian personality, geared more toward children, and introduced now familiar elements such as Felix's magic bag of tricks, a satchel that could assume the shape and characteristics of anything Felix wanted. The show did away with Felix's previous supporting cast and introduced many new characters, all of which were performed by voice actor Jack Mercer. Aurelio's plots revolve around the unsuccessful attempts of the antagonists to steal Felix's magic bag, though in an unusual twist, these antagonists are occasionally depicted as Felix's friends as well. The cartoons proved popular, but critics have dismissed them as paling in comparison to the earlier Sullivan-era works, especially since Aurelio aimed the cartoons at children. Limited animation and simplistic storylines did nothing to diminish the series' popularity. In 1970, Aurelio gained complete control of the Felix character, and continues to promote the character to this day. In the late 1980s, after his father's death, Don Aurelio teamed up with European animators to work on the character's first feature film, Felix the Cat, the movie. In the film, Felix visits an alternate reality along with a professor and Poindexter. New World Pictures planned a 1987 Thanksgiving release for U.S. theaters, which did not happen. The movie went direct-to-video in August 1991. In 1995, Felix appeared on television again, in the series The Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat. Baby Felix followed in 2000 for the Japanese market, and also the direct-to-video Felix the Cat Saves Christmas. Felix co-starred with Betty Boop in the Betty Boop and Felix comic strip. Aurelio has also brought about a new wave of Felix merchandising, including Wendy's Kids Meal toys and a video game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. According to Don Aurelio's Felix the Cat blog, as of September 2008 there were plans in development for a new television series. Aurelio's biography page also mentions a 52-episode cartoon series then in the works, titled The Felix the Cat Show, which was slated to use computer graphics. Home video, DVD releases include Presenting Felix the Cat from Bosco Video. Felix from LumaVision. Felix the Cat, the Collector's Edition from Delta Entertainment. And Before Mickey from Inkwell Images Inc. Some of the TV series cartoons were released on DVD by Classic Media. Some of the 1990s series has also been released. Filmography. Voice actors. Felix was silent until 1936, when the sudden popularity of Mickey Mouse prompted the animators to produce Felix cartoons with sound. Walter Tetley, Jack Mercer, Chris Phillips, Bill Madcox Hernandez, Charlie Adler, Frederick Newman, Dave Coulier. Legacy. In 2004, Felix was voted among the 100 greatest cartoons in a poll conducted by the British television channel Channel 4, ranking at number 89. In the same year, Felix was named number 36 in Animal Planet's 50 Greatest Movie Animals. In 2002, Felix was voted in TV Guide's 50 Greatest Cartoon Characters of All Time, ranking number 28. In 1929, when television was in the experimental stages, the very first image to ever be seen was an illustration of Felix the Cat. It remained on there for hours while engineers used it as a test pattern. In popular culture, Felix was to make cameo appearance in Disney and Amblin Entertainment film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The rights to the character were not obtained, but he appears as the masks of tragedy and comedy on the keystone of the entrance to Toontown. Felix the Cat was featured on the NHL goalie far copyright Licks Potvin's helmet while he played for the Boston Bruins. The Cat had been Potvin's nickname dating back to his days with the Toronto Maple Leafs. In Japan, 2 commercials for the 1991 Daihatsu Mira featured Felix. There was a special trim package called Felix the Mira offered at the time. In Italy, Felix was called Mio Mao under fascism, and was published by Corriere dei Piccoli. The cartoon My Life as a Teenage Robot features a diner called Mesmer's, and the doorway to the restaurant is a giant Felix the Cat head. In an episode of The Simpsons, Dean Scungio quotes from the Encyclopedia of Animated Cartoons on the history of Felix. A Felix doll became Charles Lindbergh's companion on his famed flight across the Atlantic. Another episode of The Simpsons, in which the origins of the cartoon characters Itchy and Scratchy are explored, parallels some of the disputed history Felix's creation set forth above, and includes a spoof film entitled Manhattan Madness, presented as the first Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, supposedly from 1919, that is similar in style to Felix in Hollywood, and other early Felix animations. Felix appeared in the 1927 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, making him the first balloon to float in the parade. Unfortunately, when the balloons were released, he got tangled in some phone wires and caught fire. The fire was put out, but Felix was shelved. Felix appeared in opening credits of Futurama episodes, How Hermes Requisitioned His Groove Back, The Lesser of Two Evils, and War is the H-Word. Felix is also a cat food in Europe. Felix plush dolls appeared in the music videos for Pay For Me by Whale and My Favorite Game by the Cardigans, both by Jonas Åkerlund. Part of a Felix cartoon was played in the 2002 film 100 Women, by a projector that Sam was using to play the cartoon on Hope's building. American DJ Felix da Housecat used Felix as an inspiration for his stage name. It is believed that Naoto Oshima was inspired by Felix the Cat for the design and creation of Sonic the Hedgehog while working at Sega. Felix also appears in picture frames in Fuddruckers. In the Lee J. Ames book Draw 50 Cats, readers are shown how to draw Felix the Cat step by step. A very small clip of Felix with his bag of tricks was featured in the recent Dr. Pepper/One commercial. In 2014, comedian-musician Weird Al Yankovic referenced Felix in the video for his song Handy, brandishing the character's iconic yellow bag of tricks during the line, "Call me, I'll come rushing over with my bag of tricks." Felix has inspired a recurring antagonist in the novel series Zarcio do Pica-Pay Amarillo in the book Reina Picavolt Micrones Denaris Indio of 1931. See also: Animation in the United States during the Silent Era, Baby Felix, Golden Age of American Animation, Kit Kat Clock, Winsor McKay. Notes. References: Barrier, Michael, Hollywood Cartoons. Oxford University Press. Beck, Jerry, The 50 Greatest Cartoons. J.G. Press. Canemaker, John, Felix the Twisted Tale of the World's Most Famous Cat. Pantheon, New York. Crafton, Donald, Before Mickey, The Animated Film, 1898–1928. University of Chicago Press. Culhane, Shamus, Talking Animals and Other People. St. Martin's Press. Eckstein, David, Nine Lives to Live. Fantagraphics Books. Gifford, Dennis, American Animated Films, The Silent Era, 1897–1929. McFarland and Company. Moulton, Leonard, Of Mice and Magic, A History of American Animated Cartoons. Penguin Books. Solomon, Charles, The History of Animation, Enchanted Drawings. Outlet Books Company. Further reading: Patricia Vettel, Tom, Felix the Cat as Modern Trickster. JSTOR.org. American Art, Volume 10, No. 1, pages 64–87. External links: the official Felix the Cat website, Pat Sullivan at the Internet Archive. The classic Felix the Cat page at Golden Age Cartoons, Felix the Cat at the Big Cartoon Database, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, 2004, Rewind Felix the Cat, State Library of New South Wales, 2005, Reclaiming Felix the Cat PDF. Exhibition guide, including many pictures.